The Galactic Council had seen many things in its storied existence. Wars that scorched planets, alliances forged over 1,000 suns, betrayals whispered on the edges of black holes. Yet nothing, not a single thread of its intricate tapestry, had prepared it for the arrival of humans. Ambassador Elaine Torres was late. By Galactic Council standards, this was an insult of the highest order. By human standards, however, she was fashionably on time. She entered the Grand Rotunda with a slow, deliberate swagger, boots clicking against the polished obsidian floor, a Stetson perched atop her head like a badge of stubborn pride. Her dress uniform was crisp, adorned with medals that gleamed under the Council's twin suns. She smiled, a dazzling, toothy grin that showed far too much casual confidence for someone standing in the den of predators. A murmur rolled through the assembled delegates, each whisper a ripple of confusion and mild disdain. The Norjak representatives, towering insectoid creatures cloaked in silky black robes, clattered their mandibles in irritation. Beside them, the serpentine Althari coiled tighter, their jeweled eyes narrowing to slits. To them, humans were little more than an entertaining footnote, a young species playing at diplomacy. Elaine tipped her hat back slightly and approached the central dais, her presence radiating an unsettling kind of warmth, like a campfire that could just as easily be a wildfire. "Howdy, y'all," she said, voice carrying an easy twang that made several translation devices crackle in confusion. "Sure is a mighty fine day to talk about peace." The Supreme Speaker, a gelatinous mass of fluctuating colors named Vrexenoth, pulsed in muted disapproval. It had taken centuries for the Council to establish a protocol for interspecies diplomacy, and here was a human, smiling like she was at a Sunday picnic. Elaine began her speech with the kind of sincerity that only humans seemed capable of faking perfectly. She spoke of unity, of mutual growth, of respecting differences and building bridges between stars. Her words were syrupy sweet, so dripping with earnestness that several delegates found themselves instinctively reaching for hidden weapons, just in case. The Norjak, however, found it all insulting. To them, diplomacy was war by other means, a chance to assert dominance without bloodshed, but always with the implied threat of it. Midway through Elaine's address, a tall Norjak noble named Gorvax interrupted, his voice a series of harsh clicks and rasps translated into Galactic Common. "The human speaks of peace as a predator speaks of mercy, hollow, meaningless. Your kind is soft. Your kind is weak. You do not belong among us." Elaine paused, tilting her head slightly, as if considering the insult. Her smile didn't waver. If anything, it grew brighter, dangerously so. She set down her speech tablet and leaned in slightly, hands clasped behind her back. "Well, sugar," she said lightly, "that's mighty rude of ya, but I'll chalk it up to bad manners and move right along." The Norjak bristled, antennae twitching. In their culture, to be dismissed was a grievous slight, far worse than any direct insult. Gorvax took 2 aggressive steps forward, towering over Elaine, who remained infuriatingly casual, as if he were no more threatening than a tourist attraction. Before anyone could intervene, Gorvax struck. It was quick, a vicious swipe meant only to frighten, to assert physical superiority. But humans, even their diplomats, were trained differently. Elaine moved, not to defend herself, but simply by instinct, leaning back with a grace that made the blow barely graze her. Barely. The contact, however slight, was catastrophic. The Norjak's talon caught the edge of her temple. There was a soft, wet sound. Elaine stumbled once, twice, and then crumpled to the obsidian floor like a marionette with its strings cut. The rotunda froze. The silence was a vacuum, heavy and unnatural. For a heartbeat for 2, the entire Galactic Council stood still, collectively holding its breath. Gorvax drew himself up, unrepentant. The human was fragile. It was inevitable. The humans' delegation, a small contingent in formal dress, made no move, no sound. They simply stood, their faces blank, unreadable. Behind them, the walls seemed to close in, the very light of the council chamber dimming slightly, as if reacting to an unspoken, gathering storm. A single human, a tall man with sandy hair and an easygoing slouch, stepped forward. His nameplate read Commander Mark Wren. His uniform was immaculate, his boots shined, His face split in a polite, detached smile that somehow conveyed everything and nothing at once. He knelt beside Elaine's body, pressed 2 fingers to her neck, and then rose, his movements smooth and deliberate. He turned to face the council, gaze sweeping across the delegates with a predator's slow, measured calculation. "We thank you for your hospitality," Mark said, voice steady, every syllable enunciated with razor precision. "We regret to inform you that Ambassador Torres has expired." A beat. In accordance with Article 7, subsection 42 of the Galactic Accord on Diplomacy and Hostilities, Mark continued, still smiling, the unprovoked killing of a duly appointed diplomat constitutes an act of war. Vrexanoth pulsed a nervous blue. "Commander Wren, surely we can resolve this misunderstanding." Mark raised a hand, the gesture calm but commanding. "No need. Humanity is not prone to emotional decisions. We prefer measured responses." The council shifted uncomfortably. Gorvax, emboldened, stepped forward again. "Your kind will do nothing. You bark, but you have no bite." Mark's smile didn't falter. If anything, it became something sharper, something that made several seasoned warriors on the council unconsciously reach for weapons they hadn't needed in centuries. "We're terribly sorry for the inconvenience," Mark said, dipping his head in a mockery of politeness. "We will be adjusting our galactic relations accordingly." The humans turned as one and left the chamber in silence, their departure eerily synchronized, leaving behind a vacuum of unresolved dread. The council erupted the moment the doors sealed shut. Arguments, accusations, desperate rationalizations filled the rotunda like static. "They wouldn't dare," hissed the Althari speaker, wrapping herself tighter around her pedestal. "They're primitives," scoffed a delegation of Pluvan merchants, their feathered heads bobbing in disdain. "They don't even control a quadrant." "They are patient," murmured an Elderskarn historian, whose people still remembered how fast humanity had risen from planetary infancy to interstellar presence. "And they are vindictive." The Norjak delegation laughed, the sound a clicking cacophony that grated on sensitive ears. "Let them come," Gorvax said, voice dripping with contempt. "We will swat them from the stars." Beyond the council walls, deep in the blackness between galaxies, the humans moved with purpose. Fleets that had been hidden, vessels cloaked by technologies the galaxy hadn't yet discovered, shifted into position. Quietly, patiently, without fanfare. On Earth, the news of Ambassador Torres' death was met not with outrage or chaos, but with a solemn, methodical resolve. Governments spoke in measured tones. Military leaders gathered in austere rooms lined with oak tables and dim lights. Civilians carried on their lives, but under the surface, something ancient and terrible stirred. Across human space, an old signal, unused for generations, echoed from system to system. Code Black. Absolute war authorization. Mark Wren stood on the bridge of the HSS Dauntless, staring out at the stars. His second-in-command, a woman named Lieutenant Rhea Holt, approached, datapad in hand. "Sir," she said crisply. "Orders." Mark didn't look away from the viewport. "Smiling Tiger Protocol," he said softly. "Initiate Phase 1. Rhea hesitated, then nodded once. Her fingers danced across the datapad. Across human territory, sleeper agents activated. Cyber warfare units unleashed silent, lethal viruses. Trade disruptions, economic subversions, psychological operations, a symphony of unseen warfare began to play, each note calculated, each move designed to destabilize the Norjak from within before a single shot was fired. Humanity had learned long ago that real war was never won with brute strength alone. It was won in the mind first, in the breaking of spirit, the eroding of certainty. Mark finally turned from the viewport, his face lit from below by the tactical displays, casting sharp shadows over his features. "They think we're soft," he said, almost to himself. "They think because we smile, we're harmless." Rhea smirked, a grim, knowing thing. "Their first mistake." "Their last," Mark corrected. Far across the stars, the Norjak homeworld glittered under its twin suns, a beacon of arrogance and power. And somewhere, unseen, A human fleet prepared to snuff that light out with the clinical, inevitable precision of a predator that had finally decided to stop playing with its prey. The trap was sprung. And the galaxy, though it didn't know it yet, would never be the same. The war room aboard the HSS Dauntless was deceptively ordinary. To an outsider it might have looked like a boardroom on Earth. A long table, neatly arranged chairs, muted lighting. But the walls were lined with displays showing the real shape of the battlefield. Not one of trenches and cannons, but networks of trade, supply chains, political alliances. Lines of influence, vulnerabilities, opportunities. It was a surgeon's map, not a soldier's. Commander Mark Wren stood at the head of the table, a steaming mug of black coffee cradled in his hand. His easy slouch, the casual sip, the faint smirk tugging at his mouth, they all screamed relaxation. Anyone who didn't know him would have been lulled into thinking he was disinterested. Anyone who knew him well understood that he was memorizing every data point on the screens with predatory precision. Lieutenant Rhea Holt, sharp-eyed and faster-witted than most computers, tapped on her tablet, bringing up a schematic of the Norjack Dominion's critical infrastructure. Mining hubs, agricultural worlds, fuel depots, each location blinked in soft red. "We're in position across all major sectors," Rhea said, her voice clipped and professional. "Sleeper cells are active. Economic disruptors are seeded into their trade routes. Phase 1 is ready to execute on your command." Mark set down his mug with a soft clink. His fingers steepled thoughtfully. The room around him was silent, the other officers watching, waiting, holding their collective breath. "Begin," he said. Across the stars, chaos moved like a whisper. Norjack mining stations experienced critical accidents, refinery explosions, inexplicable power failures, atmospheric leaks that conveniently forced evacuations. Norjack shipping convoys found their navigational systems sabotaged, rerouting them into asteroid fields or dead zones where they simply vanished. Communications hubs suffered blackouts. Banking systems glitched, transferring entire fortunes into frozen, unreachable accounts. Food shortages began to creep across their outer colonies like a spreading rot. And yet, to the galaxy at large, humanity appeared completely uninvolved. No war fleets moved openly. No declarations were made. If anyone bothered to look, humans were still offering cheery messages of cooperation and trade, smiling in council meetings, attending diplomatic events with glasses of champagne raised high. It was warfare by 1,000 cuts, and the Norjack were bleeding badly. Back aboard the Dauntless, Mark leaned against the railing of the observation deck, watching a swirling nebula throw violet light across the void. Rhea joined him, her own mug steaming in her hands. "They still think we're amateurs," she said, sounding both amused and disgusted. "They want to believe it," Mark replied. "Easier than admitting they picked a fight with the thing hiding under the bed." He sipped his coffee, savoring the bitterness. "Besides," he added with a half-smile, "the surest way to make a human dangerous is to assume they aren't." Down in the command pit, analysts and tacticians worked tirelessly, tracking the unfolding consequences. Mark had handpicked them. Veterans of Earth's shadow wars, people who understood that real power wasn't in who fired the first shot, but in who controlled the pieces no one realized were part of the game. Infiltrators planted years ago activated. Seemingly loyal Norjack administrators turned out to be on humanity's payroll, feeding false reports to their superiors. Politicians on Norjack colony worlds began to push for reforms suspiciously aligned with Earth's values. Paranoia seeped through Norjack command structures like a virus. No one knew who could be trusted. The Council noticed the disturbances, of course. There were whispers of economic instability, of civil unrest. But when humanity's envoys were asked, they merely shrugged and spoke in comforting platitudes. Mark played the role to perfection. In his speeches he was all humble apologies and vague reassurances, lamenting the unfortunate tensions affecting their friends in the Norjack Dominion. Behind closed doors, he crafted plans with the cold meticulousness of a master surgeon preparing an unavoidable amputation. One evening, as the stars outside the Dauntless wheeled and burned, Mark gathered his inner circle for a briefing. Around the table sat Lieutenant Holt, Intelligence Director Samuel Vance, and Fleet Admiral Naomi Lee. Mark activated the main display, which now showed not just the Norjack Dominion, but a web of secondary species, minor powers who had long gravitated toward the Norjack for protection or economic advantage. "Here's the real battlefield," Mark said, his voice low, threading through the room like a blade through silk. "The Norjack can absorb a lot of punishment. They're tough, but their allies are opportunistic. They don't care who's in charge as long as they're left alone." He pointed at several highlighted systems. "Our goal isn't just to break the Norjack. It's to make them radioactive. If we move right, when we finally go kinetic, they won't have a single friend left to call." Admiral Lee, a veteran of the Europa rebellions, tapped her knuckles against the table thoughtfully. "You're proposing a full political isolation." Mark grinned. "Smiling tiger doctrine. We gut them before they realize they're even under the knife." Vance, the oldest in the room and the most cynical, chuckled. "I do love when the bad guys volunteer to dig their own graves." Over the next standard month, humanity's shadow war intensified. Pirate fleets, secretly funded by Earth, began hitting Norjack convoys. False flag operations made it look like Norjack security forces were attacking their own colonies. Carefully seeded scandals erupted in the media networks of neighboring species, revealing decades of Norjack corruption and exploitation. By the time open fighting finally began, no one wanted to come to the Norjack's aid. Not out of fear of humanity, not yet, but because the Norjack had been made to look like sick, dying animals. And no one in the galaxy wasted resources on the already doomed. Back in the council chambers, the humans remained infuriatingly friendly. At a particularly tense meeting, the Pluvan ambassador confronted Mark in full view of the assembled delegates. "Commander Wren," the ambassador said, feathers ruffled, "surely your people must know something of these disturbances?" Mark, seated with the casual air of a man at a backyard barbecue, smiled warmly. "We wish only for peace and stability, Ambassador. Anything else would be inconvenient for all parties involved." It was a simple sentence, innocuous on the surface. But the slight pause, the razor edge in his tone, made the meaning clear to anyone listening carefully. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. The Althari diplomat, ancient and wise beyond centuries, studied Mark as one might a beautiful but venomous snake. After a long moment, she inclined her head slightly, not in greeting, but in the slow, grudging acknowledgement of a predator recognizing another. The Norjack grew increasingly desperate. Their attempts at retaliation were clumsy, rushed. They launched economic countermeasures that backfired spectacularly. They accused humanity of sabotage without proof, making themselves look paranoid and unstable. They demanded action from the Council, but received only platitudes and polite delays. When a Norjack warship, the Fanged Glory, attacked a human freighter near the neutral planet of Athrasa, humanity had all the justification it needed. Mark stood on the dauntless bridge, watching the Council's official declaration authorize defensive measures. "Defensive," he mused aloud, a small smile playing at his lips. Such a flexible word. Within hours, human fleets emerged from cloak across dozens of sectors. They struck with terrifying precision, dismantling Norjack forward bases, severing trade routes, occupying critical jump points. Every engagement was clean, brutal, efficient. And still, humanity kept smiling. Messages were broadcast before each strike. "Dear Norjack authorities, we regret the necessary enforcement of defensive measures. Please evacuate non-combatants. Have a pleasant cycle." It wasn't war in the way the galaxy understood it. It was a surgical dissection. The Norjack fought back with rage and confusion, launching fleet after fleet, but humanity's forces were always one step ahead, cutting off reinforcements, sabotaging supply lines, collapsing communications. On the Council worlds, rumors spread like wildfire. Some said humans were psychic. Others whispered that they had ancient precursors backing them. Still others believed Earth had discovered dark technologies, forbidden sciences. The truth was simpler and far more terrifying. Humans were just better at war. Not because they were stronger. Not because they were faster. But because they understood something most species had forgotten. Real war was won long before the first shot was fired. Mark stood in the dauntless CIC, as another victory report scrolled across the main screen. Fleet Admiral Lee turned to him, one eyebrow raised. Phase 2? She asked. He nodded. Phase 2. Across human space, mobilization codes lit up. Reserve fleets activated. Defense grids spun to life. Planetary militias received encrypted orders. Humanity wasn't just fighting anymore. It was preparing to end the Norjak. Rhea approached, her expression serious. Intercepted communications indicate the Norjak leadership is considering surrender negotiations. Mark sipped his coffee, unfazed. Let them stew. We're not finished yet. A low hum of approval ran through the command deck. They all understood. This wasn't about punishment. This was about making sure no one, ever again, thought it wise to lay a hand on humanity. As preparations accelerated, Mark found himself alone one night, standing in the dauntless observation bay, staring into the swirling abyss beyond. He thought of Elaine Torres, her easy smile, her good-hearted stubbornness. He thought of how she had believed, truly believed, that humanity could walk among the stars without bloodshed. Her dream hadn't died with her. It had been reforged in fire and steel. He raised his mug in a silent toast to the darkness beyond the glass. Here's to you, Elaine, he murmured. Sorry it had to be this way. The stars did not answer, but he didn't need them to. He had all the answers he needed. The galaxy had mistaken humanity's kindness for weakness, their patience for cowardice, their smiles for submission. It would not make that mistake again. And humanity, polite to the end, would make sure of it. The official war declaration from Earth arrived like a polite letter at the doorstep of a burning house. It was simple, elegant, and terrifying in its precision. To whom it may concern. Due to grievous violations of interstellar diplomacy and the unprovoked death of our ambassador, humanity hereby declares a state of total war against the Norjak Dominion. Effective immediately. Respectfully. The United Earth Government. The message was transmitted in every known language, broadcast on every channel, posted on every public bulletin across council worlds. It was not a roar of fury, nor a guttural call to arms. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the dry finality of an eviction notice stapled to a condemned building. Commander Mark Wren stood at the heart of the HSS Dauntless, the main bridge illuminated by tactical maps that bloomed in crimson and gold. The countdown was nearly complete. Across a dozen sectors, humanity's fleets idled in cloaked silence, awaiting the signal. Mark adjusted the cuffs of his dress uniform, immaculate as always. Beside him, Lieutenant Rhea Holt shifted from foot to foot, a tiger itching for the leash to snap. "We ready?" she asked, almost too casually. Mark's lips twitched in the ghost of a smile. "Born ready." The command was a whisper, lost under the sudden roar of activation across the stars. Humanity moved. The first strike was not a bombardment but an unveiling. Ships hidden by adaptive camouflage emerged from the shadows. Sleek, predatory designs that dwarfed anything the Norjak had fielded. The Silent Spear Fleet, humanity's elite first strike armada, materialized around Norjak border stations. There was no warning, no ceremony. The stations were shredded in minutes, caught between pinpoint railgun blasts and precision torpedo strikes. On the Norjak colony world of Kavrax 3, the ground shook as automated drop pods rained down from orbit. Soldiers in powered exoskeletons, compact, efficient, lethal, deployed with ruthless efficiency. Civilians were spared, corralled safely by units trained to separate combatants with almost surgical accuracy. But Norjak military installations? Reduced to smoldering craters before local commanders even finished issuing orders. Mark watched it all unfold through the holographic feed, his arms folded, his expression unreadable. It wasn't that he enjoyed the destruction. It was that he understood it was necessary. For too long, the galaxy had confused human restraint with weakness. For too long, they had imagined humanity's smiles were shields instead of veiled blades. Now they would learn otherwise. In the council, pandemonium reigned. Emergency sessions were called. Frantic ambassadors from neutral species screamed across hollow channels. Couldn't humanity see reason?
Couldn't they show mercy?
The humans smiled, bowed their heads, and issued formal responses. We are conducting defensive actions to secure our sovereignty and dignity. We apologize for any inconvenience. No apologies. No concessions. Only relentless advance. On the fourth day, the Norjak launched their grand counterattack. It was supposed to be a decisive morale-shattering blow, a multi-pronged strike with 3 armadas converging on a key human supply hub near the star cluster known as the Pleiades Rift. Mark had known about it for weeks. He stood in the dauntless Situation Room, sipping lukewarm coffee, as the Norjak fleets hurtled straight into a trap that had been lovingly, patiently set. The human response was almost artistic. Hidden minefields, deployed by stealth drones weeks earlier, tore into the Norjak vanguard. Electronic warfare suites blanketed their ships with false signals, scrambling communications into babbling nonsense. Railgun turrets hidden within what had looked like harmless cargo stations unfolded like metallic flowers, punching neat holes through Norjak capital ships. In the final act, human dreadnoughts, 3 times larger than any known Norjak vessel, decloaked directly behind the enemy forces. The battle lasted 17 minutes. When it ended, the Pleiades Rift was littered with the drifting wreckage of what had once been the Norjak's greatest fleets. On the dauntless bridge, Rhea Holt let out a low whistle. "That's damn near poetry." Mark said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the casualty reports scrolling across the screen. Minimal human losses. Precise, deliberate. Just as planned. He turned to the communications officer. "Broadcast." The young ensign, barely 20, nodded sharply and activated the transmission. Mark stepped forward into the recording field. His uniform was immaculate, his posture relaxed, his hands folded neatly at his back. "To the Norjak leadership," he said, voice steady, almost kind. "We extend our condolences on your recent losses. We would like to remind you that further hostilities are both unnecessary and inadvisable. Should you wish to surrender, we are willing to discuss terms. Respectfully, Commander Mark Wren." He gave a small, polite bow and cut the feed. The message was broadcast across every available Norjak channel. Across their worlds, despair settled like toxic dust. And still, the humans kept advancing. On the council homeworld of Saravan, the surviving Norjak ambassador, Lord Veshtak, staggered into the Great Hall to demand emergency aid. His carapace was dulled with stress, his voice a rasping plea. "They're not fighting fair," he bellowed. "They're using tactics beyond reason." The assembled delegates, Altherai, Pluvin, Ilari, and a dozen other species, exchanged uncomfortable glances. Not out of sympathy. Out of fear. Humanity wasn't using forbidden technology. It wasn't employing black magic. It was simply better. Veshtak slammed his claws against the council podium, splintering the wood. "You must sanction them. You must stop them before." He stopped. Because the human ambassador had entered the room. It was a different envoy this time, a woman named Sophia Zhang. Younger than most, dressed in the unassuming uniform of a junior diplomatic officer. No medals. No gaudy displays. Just a kind smile and steady, piercing eyes. She bowed politely to the assembly. "We humbly submit," she said, "that humanity has acted within the bounds of interstellar law. We responded to an act of war with a formal declaration, and have offered surrender terms multiple times." She smiled a little wider, just enough to flash the tiniest hint of teeth. "If the Norjak prefer annihilation to compromise, we are, of course, prepared to oblige." There was no overt threat in her words. Only inevitability. The council voted. No sanctions were issued. No aid was offered. The Norjak were on their own. Aboard the Dauntless, the final phase began. Mark and his team initiated coordinated strikes on the Norjak homeworld's defensive grid. Not random bombardments. Precision hits. Military command centers, shipyards, orbital batteries, all eliminated systematically. Within days, the Norjak military was reduced to scattered remnants, forced into hiding or surrender. Mark authorized ground teams to secure the Norjak capital. The humans didn't destroy their cities. They didn't massacre civilians. They moved with clinical efficiency, establishing control centers, securing infrastructure, arresting known war criminals. They treated the Norjak population with firm respect, knowing full well the galaxy was watching. And in doing so, they shattered the final myth of human weakness. In the charred ruins of the Norjak Grand Command Center, Mark stood atop a shattered podium, the broken banners of the Norjak Dominion fluttering limply behind him. Rhea Holt climbed the stairs to stand beside him, brushing dust from her uniform. "All wrapped up with a bow," she said, glancing at the haggard remnants of the Norjak leadership being marched into custody. Mark watched the scene with the same detached calm he had worn since the beginning. "Almost," he murmured. Across the galaxy, the message was clear. Earth was not a passive, naive newcomer. It was an apex predator wearing the smile of a diplomat, the handshake of a friend, and the patience of a hunter. On Earth, civilians celebrated the end of the war not with grand parades, but with quiet, private pride. Families gathered around meals. Cities lit up with fireworks not to gloat, but to remember. They celebrated the memory of Ambassador Elaine Torres, whose death had been the ember that ignited a supernova. Mark watched the celebrations from orbit, a private feed playing silently on a corner screen. He let himself smile, just a little. It wasn't victory he savored. It was survival. It was proof that humanity's dream of peace could still exist, if enforced by the unblinking eyes of those willing to do what must be done. Lieutenant Holt interrupted his thoughts with a fresh report. "Sir," she said, "the council's requested a meeting. Full assembly. They want to discuss a new arrangement." Mark set his mug down and straightened his uniform. "Of course they do," he said with a dry chuckle. He turned to the dauntless crew, voice carrying the quiet strength of someone who had carried his people through fire and darkness. "Set course for Saravan," he ordered. "Let's go teach the galaxy how to smile properly." As the Dauntless accelerated into the stars, Mark allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. The war was over. But the real game was only just beginning. The council hall on Saravan had never looked so humbled. Once a proud cathedral of galactic power, it now felt like a hastily cleaned-up crime scene. The banners of 100 species still hung from the vaulted ceilings, but today they fluttered listlessly, like spectators at their own funeral. Commander Mark Wren walked through the central aisle with measured steps, Lieutenant Rhea Holt and a small cadre of human delegates flanking him. They moved with the confidence of victors, but without arrogance. That was the human way. To conquer not by swaggering, but by smiling politely, and leaving no alternative. Mark adjusted the cuffs of his uniform, as crisp as the day he first put it on. His boots echoed against the marble floor, the sound carrying into every darkened corner. The delegates lining the walls, Altherai, Pluvin, Ilari, and dozens more, watched him with barely concealed fear. He did not speak immediately. He allowed the silence to stretch, a taut string pulling tighter with every second. Negotiation was an art, and tension was a brushstroke. At the far end of the hall on the speaker's dais, Rexanoth, the same gelatinous council leader who had presided over the disastrous first contact, quivered nervously. His color shifted through uneasy hues as Mark climbed the steps and faced the assembly. "Honored council members," Mark began, his voice clear, polite, almost warm. "We appreciate your hospitality and your willingness to engage in necessary conversations regarding the future of our shared galaxy." There was a murmur among the delegates. No one missed the weight behind his gentle phrasing. Mark smiled, just enough to be disarming. Earth believes in partnership. We believe in respect, cooperation, and the right of every species to govern its own destiny. He let that hang for a moment, savoring the tiny flickers of hope it ignited. "However," he continued, the smile never reaching his eyes, "we also believe in consequences." Several delegates visibly recoiled, as if he had drawn a weapon rather than spoken words. "The Norjak Dominion," Mark said, turning slightly to gesture toward the empty seats where Norjak ambassadors once sat, "chose to violate fundamental diplomatic principles. They mistook kindness for cowardice, courtesy for concession. They paid the appropriate price." The assembly remained silent. No one dared interrupt. Going forward, Mark said, his voice softening again, humanity will be instituting certain guarantees. The screens behind him activated, displaying a series of documents. Terms, clauses, agreements. Every delegate leaned forward to read them. No annexations. No forced occupations. No slavery, no plundering. Humanity would not demand tribute, or dismantle governments, or dictate internal policies. Instead, they demanded something far more dangerous: collaboration. Every major species would open diplomatic academies to teach human history, human warfare, human philosophy. Every major power would agree to collective security treaties, meaning any attack on Earth or its allies would trigger unified military response. Trade would flow freely, but violations of contracts would be met with coordinated sanctions. It was, in short, the building of a new galactic order. One where humanity stood not above, but among the other species, smiling, helpful, but unmistakably holding the keys to the new era. Vrexenoth pulsed uncertain colors, struggling for words. "Commander Wren," he finally managed, "these terms, they are not unreasonable. But they are comprehensive. You leave little autonomy." Mark inclined his head in mock sympathy. "Autonomy remains, Speaker. Only the autonomy to destroy oneself has been trimmed slightly." A few brave delegates chuckled nervously. Mark didn't press. He didn't need to. They would accept. They already had, the moment they allowed him to speak unchallenged. Still, for the sake of formality, a vote was conducted. The measure passed by an overwhelming majority. The alternative was simply unthinkable. Later, as the council recessed, Rhea leaned close and murmured under her breath, "Was it supposed to be that easy?" Mark's lips quirked. "It's always easy when they're terrified enough." She grinned. "You do have a way with people." He chuckled softly. "People are easy. It's predators you have to charm." As they departed the hall, they passed clusters of alien dignitaries whispering among themselves, casting furtive glances at the humans. Some eyes shone with admiration, others with barely concealed terror. Either would serve. Back aboard the Dauntless, celebrations began, muted but heartfelt. Crews broke out ration bottles of whiskey, shared contraband cigars, played old Earth songs over the ship's comms. Laughter filled the halls, not the laughter of conquerors, but of survivors. Of people who had been ready to die, and had instead rewritten history. Mark didn't join them. He stood alone on the observation deck, watching the stars drift by. The galaxy had changed. Not because humans were stronger, but because humans had never been what the galaxy assumed. They were not youthful, bumbling newcomers. They were a species born of struggle, raised on wars, sharpened by disaster. They were apex predators wrapped in civility, carrying smiles like concealed blades. They had given the galaxy every chance. Warnings. Offers of peace. Outstretched hands. And the galaxy had slapped those hands away. Now the galaxy shook hands with steel. Rhea found him there, 2 glasses in hand. She offered one without a word. Mark took it, raised it lightly in salute. "To Elaine," Rhea said. "To the future," Mark answered. They clinked glasses. The sound was soft, but it echoed against the glass, drifting into the void beyond. Earth's anthem played quietly over the ship's internal systems. Not a bombastic march. Not a call to arms. A simple, melancholic tune. An old folk song, talking about roads, home, mountains far away. Humanity had conquered not through rage, but through relentless, patient force of will. The future would remember this day not as humanity's triumph, but as the day humanity stopped hiding. The Council reassembled 2 weeks later, ostensibly to ratify the new treaties. In truth, it was a formality. Fear had done what diplomacy could not. Mark stood before them once again, his uniform immaculate, his voice calm. "Humanity," he said, "welcomes you to a new era. An era where respect is mutual. Where kindness is returned. Where violence is not a tool of first resort, but a guarantee against injustice." He paused, letting his gaze sweep the room. "And should any choose to forget," he said, voice dropping just slightly. "We will remind them." Politely. The smile he gave them was a masterpiece. Warm, gentle, and absolutely merciless. The council bowed their heads in agreement. After the session, an Althari elder approached him, one of the few who had not fled or hidden during the war. Her scaled skin shimmered with age, and her eyes, deep and ancient, studied Mark as one might study a riddle wrapped in fire. "You smile when you promise death," she said, not accusing, merely observing. Mark shrugged lightly. "Only because it would be rude to frown." She nodded slowly. "Perhaps it is better to be ruled by those who understand courtesy and inevitability." Without another word, she turned and departed. Rhea approached, amused. "Making new friends?" "Planting seeds," Mark said. Behind him, the humans quietly dismantled the last remnants of the old galactic order, brick by careful brick. News broadcasts buzzed across the galaxy. Alien commentators tried to explain the sudden shift. Analysts discussed human psychology, trying to piece together what they had missed. Academics invented new fields of study overnight: human diplomacy studies, human strategic warfare theory. Across newly freed Norjack worlds, human advisors set up new institutions: democratic councils, free markets, libraries stacked with history books detailing humanity's own brutal, bloody past. It was not colonization. It was transformation. It was dominance so complete it didn't even require occupation. On the Dauntless, Rhea and Mark watched a council broadcast together. The screen showed alien dignitaries exchanging ceremonial gifts with human envoys. Smiles all around. Carefully measured, politely forced. "They're scared of us," Rhea said, swirling the last of her drink. Mark considered that for a long moment. "They're scared of what we had to become," he said finally. "But maybe that's the price of peace." She leaned back, stretching like a cat. "Not a bad price, all things considered." He smiled, a genuine one this time. "No. Not bad at all." A silent alert blinked in the corner of the screen. New intelligence. Minor rumblings on the galactic fringe. A few isolated warlords, eyeing the new human-led order with resentment. Mark read the report, closed it, and filed it away without urgency. There would always be those who resisted change. But now, humanity would face them not with naive hope, but with sharpened smiles and steady hands. The Dauntless cut through the darkness, engines glowing like a promise. The stars stretched ahead, infinite and patient, waiting for the next fool to mistake kindness for weakness, waiting for humanity to smile and tighten the noose. The galaxy had been warned. The galaxy had chosen. And humanity would, forevermore, answer choice with consequence. Always politely. Always with a smile. And never, ever with mercy again.